Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for clicking on the video as always. It's been a fairly hectic 3 weeks since my last trip over to Shielding. The weather hasn't really changed since that video. We've been in an unbelievably warm and dry period of weather. You know, high pressure just sitting over us. It's been close to 20 degrees nearly every day for the last 3 weeks, and the Highlands are just an absolute tinderbox at the moment, and that's after a particularly dry spring as well. So yeah, the fire rating at the moment is extreme, and some of you that have watched the news and follow me on Instagram will have heard that there's a very large wildfire going on in Cannock at the moment. It started just over a couple of weeks ago. It's still burning, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that at the end of the video. But for this trip, we are headed out to visit yet another ancient Caledonian pinewood remnant, and this time it's in a place called Glenloyne. And we're just west of Invergarry, and Glenloyne's kind of sandwiched between Glenclooney to the north and Glengarry to the south. And we're making our way up this old track at the moment. We're on East Glenkeach estate, and once we get over the ridge of this hill into Glenloyne, then we will be on Clooney estate. But this pinewood remnant is a little bit special because it actually includes the oldest recorded Scots pine in the whole of the UK. But yeah, if any of that interests you, please stick around, and I hope you enjoy the video. Hey, is that good? I'm really not trying to be cool. I'm just trying to keep the sun off my neck. It's so warm. Not a bad view. Yeah, our path winds just down there through the gap here. But we're basically looking onto, we've got the Afric Hills in the distance, and the hills up from the Clooney Inn, just here, and then this one here, if you're walking it from east to west, is the first summit on the South Shield Ridge. It's actually quite nice here. It's just a couple of degrees cooler, and it's a bit of a breeze as well. And you know, like I say, it's been like this up here for the last 3 weeks. You know, it's only the first half of June, and I've got a Highland tan already. Ridiculous. So I just sat down at the top of the hill. You know, obviously takes a bit of effort to get up here, and I noticed something just in front of me. Now look at this. Absolute wankers. Like, why would you do that? Why would you leave that up here at the top of a hill? You know, what effort is it to just stick that in your bag and take it away? You've gone to the effort to hide it under a rock. I just don't understand people. We are making our way down the other side now, and you know, this landscape is quite typical, especially of the northwest highlands. No forest, big open expanses of heather and rough grass, and not much else. You know, a history of incredibly high deer pressure. Still is. So yeah, I just wanted to remind you that, you know, when I show you the shots of the landscape here, you know, this should pretty much all be pine forest and, you know, broadleaf scrub type forest up in the corries and along the burnsides and that kind of thing. And as you can see, there's virtually nothing. It's coming down the hill here, and there's a decent sized rowan tree, I think it is, over there. And I've mentioned this before. A lot of people will say, wow, isn't that tree amazing to survive out here on its own? And no, that tree is lucky. And what you should be saying is, wow, where are all the other trees? You know, why has that one survived and nothing else has? And for some reason it must have been protected or out of harm's way somehow, and it's just held on and it's here today. But for all the rest of the trees here, they weren't so lucky. Go on in. So the path actually takes us through a fenced enclosure, basically designed to, you know, ring fence some of the remaining pine trees and you know, encourage any regen they're producing. I think there may have been little bits planted as well. So yeah, we're just coming down to the fence here. Although straight away I can see a hole that it looks like people have created for dogs, which is not great, because if it's big enough for a dog, it's big enough for deer, you know. So yeah, we know the fence isn't secure straight away. Go on in. Okay, so we're starting to see the first real presence of any kind of forest. That's a big dead pine right in front. It shows you the size of trees that would have been here. And there's actually another one here. It's still alive. Looking quite impressive. And there's a small kind of scattering of birch and rowan. I think what I might do though, because it's not even 12 o'clock yet, is make my way down to, there should be a gate at the bottom end of this, head down to near the river, pick a camp spot, cool off, have some lunch, and then sort of come back up to have a closer look at the, you know, the pine trees themselves. So we're through the other side. The pinewood is behind me. I don't know if you can see it, I can't see with the glare. We're just taking a straight line from the gate down to the river. Looks like a few nice grassy spots, so hopefully be quite comfortable. I'll try and give you the sort of lay of the land here. We're obviously down at the river, but in front of us here, this is where we came down and walked through this enclosure. And that enclosure is the biggest of three. There are a few mature pines that seem to be still living, quite a few that are dead, quite a few young trees, especially down this bottom section, but I'm almost certain they've all been planted because they're not near any live parent trees, and they're very uniform, you know, so they've all been planted at the same time. There's a little bit of regen in there and remnants of other things like birch and rowan, but not a huge amount for the size of the enclosure. There's another enclosure, small one just here, and then a bigger one at the back. And there's kind of scattered mature trees kind of all over this basin, really, inside and outside fences. There's a few, there's a burn kind of running up here. There's a few remnant trees up there, which is where I might walk up to after this. And yeah, this enclosure at the back is probably the second biggest one. It's quite long, and up on the slope here, there's kind of remnant, looks like mainly birch woodland, a bit of rowan in there too. That's obviously survived on the sort of steep, inaccessible slope, but that seems to be producing quite a bit of regen inside the fence below it. It looks quite thick in places. I'm sure there's been some planting in there too. I can see quite uniform pockets of pine, but that's the enclosure that probably has the most trees in it. Yeah, like I say, you can see sort of skeleton pine, sort of dead pine all over this face. There's loads of big roots in the peat, even down here, which shows, you know, where the trees stretch to and what used to be here before all the forest was cleared. But yeah, we'll take a walk up just now and have a closer look at some of these old pine trees. Okay, so I'm just making my way up the outside of this exclosure fence, And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the reason that the three enclosures that I just showed you look a different colour on the landscape, and it's because they are. So outside of the enclosure, the ground vegetation is mainly dominated by grasses, and grasses have evolved to cope with repeated browsing. So they grow from the base, so they can get nipped off but keep growing back from the base. Whereas lots of other vegetation like trees or woody shrubs like heather, or like flowering sort of herb species, they tend to grow from the tip, or reproduce from the tip, such as flowers. The youngest parts of the tree or woody shrubs is the outer bits. They're the newest bits because it keeps growing out. And if the grazing or browsing pressure's too high, and the flowers keep getting nipped off so they can't set seed, or leaves, and the growing tip keep getting chewed off, eventually these things disappear, and all that's left is the grasses that are able to keep growing from the base. So inside the fence here, the reason it's that brownish colour is because the heather layer has been able to grow back, basically. And out here, where the grazing pressure is still high, like I say, it's dominated by grasses. And it's as simple as that. The problem is, though, when you put these fences in and the heather starts to grow back, if there's no grazing in there at all, eventually the heather becomes too thick, too rank to allow anything else to come through. So then it starts to prevent any sort of tree regeneration, because it's any sort of seed from the trees struggle to penetrate down through the heather to the ground to then grow up through the heather. As I've said before, what you really need is a balance. You need that kind of browsing and grazing pressure in balance with the amount of biomass on the landscape. So fences are good to get things started, but long term, we really don't want to need them. We want the deer population and the sheep population in balance across this whole area. Welcome to Glenloyne Pinewood, or what's left of it. We've been having a bit of a wander around, and as you've seen so far, there's very few mature Scots pine left in this area, and the land we're on at the moment is Cluny Estate. So Glen Cluny is just over the hill here. And in the late 90s, the Forestry Commission were doing quite a bit of research into our existing sort of ancient Caledonian pine woods, and they came out here and found, I think there's about 80 to 100 trees left. This was back in 1997, and they took samples from all the mature trees here and sent them off to get tested to find out what age they were. Now, I have to admit, I don't actually know which tree is the oldest one here. It wasn't made sort of common knowledge on purpose to protect the actual tree, because as you know, as soon as you slap a label like that on something, people want to come visit, and there's a lot of pressure on it, and it gets ruined, and yeah. But the findings that came out of that research were that for the 80 to 100 trees that remain here, the average age was 440 years old. They found at least 7 trees that were over 500 years old. And the oldest tree they found was 550 years old. So that was back in 97. So you can add another quarter of a century onto that. And one of these trees here is most likely 570 plus years old. To put that into a bit of historical context, that means that potentially the oldest tree started its life in 1450 AD. And if we work our way back, that means the tree started growing 300 years before the Battle of Culloden in 1746. That also means it would have started growing 250 years before the last wolf was seen in Scotland, which is thought to be 1680 AD. So there was probably wolves in this glen, and you never know, they might have slept under this very tree behind me. I guess we'll never know, but it is quite a nice thought. And we can go back even further, and the tree probably started growing about 40 to 50 years before Christopher Columbus set sail to discover America. So yeah, these trees are old, and they've been here a very long time. Now, usually the average lifespan for Scots pine is around 250 to 300 years old, depending on the growing conditions and the exposure and, the environment that they're in. So the fact that so many of the ones remaining here have lived to 500 years old or more, they've done pretty well. And, who's to say there wasn't a lot more at one point, because if you go to the continent, there's loads of records of Scots pines living to 500 years old or more. And I did a little bit of digging to see if I could find out what the oldest ever recorded Scots pine was. And apparently in Finnish Lapland, way up north, there's a Scots pine there that's been aged at 810 years old. So it doesn't surprise me that it's there, because way up north the growth rate is so slow. I'm not surprised it's been able to hold on that long, but 810 years is still impressive. And if you're new to the channel, you may be wondering, why are there so few trees left here? And it's the classic story of forest being cleared, as it was across much of the Highlands. And subsequently, areas were heavily grazed and browsed by deer and sheep. The land was burned, to produce this grass, and that meant that no young trees could come through. And over time, the more and more that happens, the parent trees start to die off. They don't live forever, so there's nothing to produce seed to create younger trees, and we have what we're left with in the Highlands today: vast areas of virtually nothing. Most of our native woodland is gone, and just a few trees cling on in remote corners of glens like this. And for me, I get mixed emotions when I come to places like this, because you make your way into a remote glen and we kind of expect not to see trees now. That's what we're used to. But then you do see some trees, and in some pockets here there's quite a few. But I don't know whether that gives me hope or despair at just how much we've actually lost and how long it would take to get anything even remotely resembling what we lost back again. And here, you know, although we have got some protection in the form of these 3 enclosures and we're seeing some young trees, it looks like it was too late for a lot of them. You know, there's a lot of dead mature pine here, and obviously once they're dead they can't produce seed, so yeah, we really need to protect these areas before we lose the mature trees, and not just before they die, before they lose their ability to produce seed, because not all these trees will produce seed right to when they're finished. You know, I've spoken about that before, that you know, like us, although we live to, you know, 70, 80 years or more, we're not able to breathe for that long. So yeah, same applies to trees. Eventually they start to go on the downhill and they can't produce viable seed forever. But anyway, I'm glad I came out here. Haven't been out here before. I wanted to see what it looked like. Some very impressive big trees. This one's particularly nice, and then the barn and the pools below it. Unfortunately, there's a massive fire pit with charred wood just beside it, which I won't go into that rant just now. But yeah, there's some pretty big birch and rowan too, and just behind the camera here there's a huge alder. There's a few big alders down this watercourse as well, so you know, just more glimpses of what would have been here in the past. And you know, I guess there's some hope that, you know, if we manage to get deer numbers low enough in these areas at some point in the future, these may still be a seed source. But anyway, I'm probably going to keep looking around for a little while yet, and then we'll head on back down the hill to the tent, and we'll think about cooking up some dinner for the evening. So we're just heading back down the hill, back to the camp spot. I walked past a few of the kind of dead mature pines, and there's numbers on them, so I think we've lost quite a few since that original survey was done 25 years ago, which is a shame. It's just a real still, hazy summer night. There's a few midge starting to appear now though. That wind's really dropped. And Clegs as well. But nowhere near as bad as I was imagining earlier on. Right, we've just gone for a last little wander this evening. Mids are getting a little bit annoying now. As soon as you stop, they're all over you, so I think I'm going to call it a night there. It's just after 9 o'clock. I've got a book with me, so I'll probably just read for a bit in the tent and then fall asleep, hopefully, if it's not too warm to sleep. And I'm just in shorts and t-shirt just now. It must be, can't be much less than 20 degrees to be honest. But yeah, I'll call it a day there and I'll see you in the morning. Morning folks. I actually slept really well. First couple of hours were a bit too warm in here, so I was literally just lying on top of the sleeping bag and sleeping mat in just my shorts. But then it cooled down a little bit and was quite comfortable. There was actually some rain through the night. It rained for a few hours and it was quite heavy at one point. It woke me up, which is good. We definitely need it, but it won't be enough. Yeah, it's very still now. I can see a lot of midge round the tent. But I don't have much planned for this morning. I'm really just gonna make breakfast, get packed up and go. I've just got coffee and just packet porridge. Nothing interesting at all, so I'll just do that and yeah, we'll get going. Right guys, that's us all packed up. The midge were quite bad hanging around the tent this morning, but just now, surprisingly, they're not that bad at all. But yeah, I'm going to get this midge jacket off now and head back the exact same way I came in. If you want to stick around for Forest Thoughts, please do. But if not, I will hopefully see you on the next one. Hi folks, thanks for sticking around for Forest Thoughts yet again. Like I mentioned earlier, I wanted to talk a little bit about forest fires and wildfires, as it's quite topical at the moment. We have a large wildfire over at Cannock at the moment, and the fire started on Forest and Land Scotland ground, and I work for Forest and Land Scotland and Cannock is in my beat, so the last couple of weeks this fire has been quite a major event for me. And the fire was officially reported on the 28th of May, although it could have been going for a couple of days before that, and it's still burning today, and this is June the 10th, so it's been burning away for a good couple of weeks now. And looking at the weather, there's no considerable rain in the forecast for at least a week maybe, so we're going to be managing this fire for quite a while yet. And in terms of actual fire damage, we've lost some conifer plantation, timber plantation, areas of native woodland, but the majority of the fire has been on open moorland, heather moorland. But of course, it's also an important time for wildlife, breeding, especially ground nesting birds, that kind of thing. And although the fire started on FLS ground, it spread to neighbouring estates and landowners, one of them being RSPB Corrimony. That was well known for its black grouse population, so they've most likely been hit quite hard, as have the RSPB's native woodland restoration schemes, unfortunately. Now, how did the fire start? Well, we're pretty sure it was a disposable barbecue that got out of control, and there is a story that the couple whose disposable barbecue it was were camping beside the African Tailway. Their barbecue got out of control. They walked all the way down to the shop at Cannock and reported that their barbecue was out of control. Why they didn't phone the fire brigade straight away, I don't know, because it would have had some time to get going whilst they were walking down to the shop in Cannock. And those of you who've watched me for a while will know I take fire safety very seriously, and this is exactly why. The amount of damage this fire's done and the amount of money that's been spent on it is just unbelievable. And even at the time the fire started, the fire risk in the Highlands was already high. So you just need to be so careful, and one disposable barbecue can cause all of this. Now, I'm not going to get into the who and why and who didn't do what and who did do what and the response and all those details, because I could end up getting myself into trouble. I just wanted to talk a little bit about it to give you an insight into how these things can play out. And essentially the first few days there was an active fire front, big flames ripping across the landscape, into the forest, and there's really not a lot people on the ground can do at that stage. And it was mostly the fire service. They set up at strategic points to try and stop it spreading to sort of people's properties and that kind of thing. And we had a couple of helicopters with water buckets, just chucking as much water at it as possible just to try and slow it down. And eventually, after a week, the active fire front kind of died down. But there was so much heat in that fire that it penetrated the ground in large areas, and it's quite a peaty area. There's a lot of carbon and organic material in that area, so it's ended up just being like a big coal bed, and there's hot spots all over the place that with a bit of air and a little bit of fuel, they just start popping up again. And the last week or so has basically been a very labour intensive process of finding these hot spots, digging them out and dousing them with water. And in terms of resources, we've had 1 to 3 helicopters flying every day doing different shifts. There's been up to 40 fire service personnel on site. I think there was 8 or 9 engines at one point on site, from crews all across the Highlands. There's been a huge amount of FLS staff involved on a rota for the last 2 weeks. RSPB staff and volunteers, local gamekeepers and neighbours getting involved. People in the local community have been providing food and accommodation and all this kind of thing. So it's been a massive thing, you know. And like I say, the amount of money, you know, these helicopters cost thousands of pounds an hour. All the staff time, you know, all the work we're now going to have to catch up on because we couldn't do for the last couple of weeks. So I wouldn't even like to put a number on the cost of this fire. And you know, in terms of the hot spots, you know, the helicopter can do a little bit, but especially if it's in the forest, you struggle to penetrate, you know, the forest canopy with the bucket. So it basically means people going in with ATVs, mobile fire pumps, shovels, you know, knapsack sprayers full of water, and literally just finding hot spots and, you know, just manually digging them out and just trying to get as much water in them as possible. And it's a really slow process, and because the fire's so big, you know, it's hard to find enough resource to cover all of that at the same time. So you're just moving around from the most high risk spots, but because the weather has stayed dry, you know, there could be bits flaring up all over the place, and then you have to redeploy people. And yeah, it's been quite an ordeal, to be honest. You know, one thing I will say is, you know, pretty much everyone involved, certainly FLS and the fire service, are massively under-resourced in terms of people on the ground. You know, fire training itself, equipment for fighting the fire. I mean, the fire service had a couple of engines that kept breaking down all the time because they were so old, and especially just cuts to, you know, public funding over the last 10 years. You know, money saving, whereas, you know, all that money that we apparently saved is probably all gone and more on this fire. It's so short-sighted, it really is. In terms of woodland ecology, fire is excellent. You know, most people think of fire as a destructive force, but in woodland ecology, it's really a force of kind of regeneration and renewal. You know, you've got a lot of species that are adapted to, you know, forest fires. Certain species of pine, you know, that their cones don't open until they feel the heat from that fire. You know, species like birch and aspen, you know, they're pioneer species. They're almost waiting for, you know, the fire to burn through and leave bare earth for them to, you know, drop their seed and germinate and get away before everything else. The problem in the UK is that, you know, we've got so little woodland resource as it is. So although it may be beneficial ecologically in certain areas, we can't really afford to lose anything that we still have. So we need to fight these fires and limit them as much as possible. You know, in areas like Canada, they've got that scale where as long as the fires aren't threatening you know, people or developed areas, they kind of just let them do their thing, you know. And yeah, you'll get hundreds, thousands of hectares of forest burned, but like I say, that's a natural component of, you know, woodland ecology, and, you know, it'll renew itself and everything will come back. But when you've got the scale like Canada, you can afford to do that, you know, because there is so much forest. But here it can be quite devastating, and obviously it's a very small, you know, densely populated country as well, so there's not many areas where you can get a large fire burning away that isn't going to affect someone somewhere. As always, I'll put links to bits and pieces below, so please check them out. Please hit subscribe if you haven't already. Please leave a comment if you have any questions or feedback on the video. It's really appreciated. And yeah, I'll hopefully see you on the next video.